Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. The election is over, and Donald Trump is coming back. In Israel and probably around the world, there's a lot of uncertainty. When we think about what the questions are here, what will the president be like when it comes to the Middle East on this new term? And who will be the people from his circle who will be in the jobs that pertain to the issues Israelis care about? Some of the names are familiar, some of them are new. On today's episode, I speak with Shmuel Rosner, JPPI colleague, to get the latest breakdown on the election results. And I also ask him as a pollster to explain to us why the polls keep getting Donald Trump wrong. I also speak with Jewish insider journalist Lahav Harkov about the way Trump's election will impact Israel, our foreign policy, and policy on issues like the West Bank, annexation, and more. Have a listen. So, Shmuel, we spoke earlier this week, and things did not look like they were necessarily end the way they did. But Trump has won in what can really be described almost as a landslide. America today is red and very red, redder than it's probably been in a long time. The House, the Senate, President. What surprised you most in the way these elections played out?
Well, two main things. One, that it ended so quickly and decisively. The margins aren't dramatically large. It's not as if it's not a landslide in the sense that Trump won by 10 points in each state. In some states, it is still a 1%, 2%, 3% margin between the two candidates, but it's all states. So it ended decisively and quickly. I was surprised to see it end so quickly. And also, I'm surprised to see Donald Trump winning the popular vote. This is something I did not expect. I don't think most pollsters expected it. The fact that he won is not a huge surprise. We knew that one of them is going to win, and we knew that it was tight, and that even a small difference between the polls and the outcome towards one of the sides is going to determine who's going to take the whole thing. But winning the popular vote is in some way dramatic and indicative of at least something.
I mean, it's interesting because when you look at even forget about the swing states for a moment, which were obviously very close all throughout this race, and even close towards the end, he might have won, like you said, just by a couple of points in each of them. But you look at states like New Jersey, where if in 2020 there was a spread of about 15 points between him and Biden, now in 24, 4 years later, it was much less. It was like 5 points. So he was able to really, even states that he didn't win, he was able to significantly reduce the margins and the spreads. So that, I mean, I guess that kind of contributes to what you're talking about in the popular vote, which means that it was much more than just a tactical or the right strategy going to the right states. It was also just about really getting all America on board to an extent.
Right. And remember, in 2016, we could still say, well, this was a fluke, an accident. People voted for someone whom they didn't really understand or weren't familiar with. This is no longer the case. This is the third time Trump is on the ballot. Americans knew very well who they were going to vote for. They know him. They understand his agenda and policies and portfolio. This is what America wants. For better or worse, this is what most American wants. And Trump can no longer be seen as some kind of weird accident. This is indeed a Trump era, and we need to understand it to the full extent in order to understand where America is going from here forward.
But just before I go to Lahav, I want to just ask one last question, because you have just in the general about the voting, you've long conducted polls and have been something of a poll. You're a pollster and you do surveys and you look at these numbers. There was obviously in 2016 there was a lot that was spoken about at the time of how everybody got it wrong, right? And then ahead of 2020. All the pollsters in America, the Nate Silvers and the Seltzers and all these people, started to reshift, and I don't know whatever the lingo is in the polling world, but they had to redo and recalibrate their panels and the weight that they give this group and that group and this person and that person to try to get it right. But we saw once again, to some extent in this election, that it wasn't as close as the polls made it out to be. I mean, how do you, kind of wearing that polling hat of yours, how do you understand what went wrong here once again?
Well, I don't think the difference between the outcome and the projection was very dramatic. It seems dramatic because of the decisive, because we see it across the board, but I don't think the gap is huge. And look, professionally speaking, polling is hard. You need to find the right people at the right time to answer your questions. And if Trump voters do not answer the pollsters, you cannot invent them. As a pollster, you cannot just, you can try to make calculations, you can put weights, but if the people aren't answering your polls, there's not much you can do about it. They're not there. You cannot take them into account, and you end up missing some segments of the population. There's nowhere around it.
Right. So Lahav, I want to talk to you for a moment just about the Jewish vote. I saw you had a long tweet thread earlier today that kind of looked at what happened to the Democrats, what happened to the Jewish vote. The initial stats that have come out speak about how Kamala Harris got 79%, although Trump in the state of New York increased significantly. I mean, I guess maybe this can change over time.
The
But
updated stat as of we're recording, which is Thursday, is that she got 67%, which is only 1% less than Biden. If she actually got 79%, that would be huge. I mean, that would
Right.
be way more than Biden. Yeah.
So talk about the Jewish vote. I mean, whether it was that initial report of 79, maybe it's now 67. Clearly, it's very fluid. But how do you interpret what happened here with Jews?
There's two stats to look at, which is that the Democrats basically their vote was stable, but the Trump vote went up 4%. So I guess there were a lot of people who either didn't vote last time or voted third party. That's the way the numbers look right now. So I think there's two things going on here. First of all, we all live in Israel, right? And so we're thinking about foreign policy all the time as the number one issue. But people who live in America think about their own lives and domestic policy. And American Jews tend to be liberal. And I think that at the end of the day, those are the interests that took precedent in their vote, right? If that's why they voted for Harris, whether it's abortion, which is a very important issue to American liberals, or I don't know, immigration, which is also something that American Jews really relate to, even though the immigration issue is now more about Latinos. Jews feel strongly, because their ancestors were immigrants. So all kinds of issues like that. And so I guess it stayed relatively stable, whereas you see that there was greater motivation among people who might support Trump who don't want to support the Democrats to go out and support Trump. And I imagine that has a lot to do with Israel and anti-Semitism issues. Trump has been much more outspoken than Harris about anti-Semitism in the U.S. Harris's husband has been sort of her emissary on these issues, but she has justified the protests and said that they have the right ideas and things like that. Whereas Trump, even before October 7th, back when he was president, had this executive order to counter anti-Semitism and boycotts and things like that on college campuses, which is something that a lot of people and a lot of voters and a lot of the children of voters are, dealing with. And also on Israel, which is, we can talk exactly about Trump's policies, but this is a time when Israel needs America's support and America's help. And based on last time, you could see that he was going to be supportive of Israel, right? But I do think that the average American Jew sees the Biden administration and Harris as very supportive of Israel as well, even if it's a different style and a different way of being supportive than Trump.
Well, being supportive doesn't mean necessarily you support Bibi Netanyahu and the policies of his government, right? That's something I always try to explain also to Israelis. But one other question on that point, Lahav. Trump did go around throughout the campaign, had a number of comments that were quite controversial at the time, where he said things like, I don't know how Jews don't support me. You must hate Israel. You must not, I'm going to paraphrase, but like, you must not be real Jews. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what he said, but some comments that were seen very controversial at the time because they weren't supporting him. And he's kept on saying, I did so much for Israel. I did so much for your people, so much for your country. He would say, even though it's not their country, doesn't make a difference. In his speech on Tuesday night, well, I guess early Wednesday morning, our time, he mentioned the coalition that helped get him voted. He voted into office. He mentioned the Muslims, right? In places like Dearborn. He did not mention the Jews. Do the Jews need to be concerned? Does the state of Israel need to be concerned?
That's an interesting point. I wasn't aware of that. Look, Trump is a person who operates. People called Kamala Harris the vibes candidate, right? Because then people who called her that said she wasn't talking about policy. But Trump is very much a vibes guy. There's no denying. And so that's not a good vibe, right? He operates a lot on sort of feelings about a lot of things. On the other hand, he does have a lot of people, both in his personal life and advising him, who are Jewish or who are pro-Israel. And when you hear the things that he says about Israel, and also when he talks about campus anti-Semitism, I don't think that Israel needs to be worried. I would say, before Trump's first term, one of the things that worried me, everybody I talked to and interviewed about Trump and experts, whatever, they all said he's going to be super pro-Israel. His policies will be good for Israel. One of the things that concerned me is that a weak America is bad for Israel. So even if his policies directly influencing Israel are good, it could be that his broader policies are a problem for us, right? I think that he was sort of mixed on that in his first term, right? I think we could argue some of his things were better and some were worse, but I don't think that Biden was great on that either. So, when it comes to Israel, I sort of hope, and Israel specifically, I hope we get a repeat of the first term.
So Shmuel, on that point, also just of the, him not mentioning the Jews in that sense, it does, he has long had this feeling, though, that the Jews are not appreciative enough. Now, again, I don't think we're going to have an anti-Semitic president. I don't think that's where it's going, although there are plenty of people on the left who do think that's the case. But it might impact policy.
Yeah, look, I did notice the omission. It could have just been an accidental omission. We don't know for sure that Trump intentionally made a list and decided to erase the Jews off the list and mention all other groups and intentionally not mention the Jews. And I must say, look, when he looks at his coalition, most Jews in America aren't a part of it. When I was still a rookie in this business back in the 90s or in the early 2000s, in each election cycle, I used to buy this notion of, Republican Jews would always say, okay, now the Republican Jewish wave is coming. And, I can show you articles that I wrote back in 2000 and 2004, after 9/11 and during the second Intifada. Oh, now with Bush versus Kerry, certainly all Jews are going to move to our side and vote for Bush and not for Kerry. I'm older now, so I didn't expect most Jews to vote for Donald Trump. I didn't expect a huge jump in the vote for Donald Trump. And what we see is that indeed most Jews kept their traditional habit of voting for the Democratic Party. Is it good for Israel? Is it bad for Israel? They voted on what they think is essential for America. They dislike the policies of Donald Trump. They dislike his character. They don't see the parallel between him or the contradiction between him and Kamala Harris as one between a pro-Israel and an anti-Israel candidate. These are two pro-Israel candidates with different styles. So we can basically say, okay, the Israeli thing is something we can push to the side, and now we can look at all the other things of importance. Had it been someone who's anti-Israel, specifically and with clear intent to harm Israel, maybe more Jews would switch to the other side. But Biden is a friend of Israel, and Kamala Harris said most of the right things about Israel. And I think that some Israelis are perplexed by the fact that American Jews would vote for a Kamala Harris and not for a Donald Trump. I think those Israelis should better grow up and look at the world as it is. American voters vote with American eyes, not with Israeli eyes.
Right. Which makes sense. Lahav, I do want to ask you, Netanyahu was probably, I think, maybe the first world leader to congratulate Trump. Clearly learned his lesson.
The third by my count, but you want to hear who the other ones are. One of them is very obvious, I think, that you would guess. So you want to guess?
Viktor Orban?
Correct. Viktor Orban was about half an hour before Netanyahu. And then before that,
Viktor Orban was the guy who tweeted like a day or two before, can't wait for Tuesday, America's going to change. I mean, like the one world leader who's also clearly like rooting for Donald Trump.
Viktor Orban was much like Trump himself. He declared Trump's victory even before the election.
Exactly. And then the other person is Bukele, who's this like the president of El Salvador, who's like very tough on crime. This is like his big thing, and he's very into crypto. So I think those are things that appeal to Trump voters.
Okay, so Netanyahu, I stand corrected. Netanyahu was number 3. Okay, so
but yes,
right. But this was
he might have been the first phone call. I think he was the first phone call of world leaders.
Very clearly learned his lesson, even though it's not true that he was the first or one of the first to congratulate Biden. He was actually one of the last, but Trump thought he was one of the first, held it against him, said that he wasn't loyal. Now, clearly, Netanyahu is trying to be loyal to the new president, using the Trump term. What is Netanyahu thinking? Let's get into his head for a moment. Where does he think this is all going?
Well, it's your lucky day because that's the news article that I worked on this morning. And he's thinking, first of all, he's very hopeful. There are a number of sort of policy areas where he thinks Trump's going to be better for Israel. First of all, Iran. They hope that there'll be a lot of sanctions on Iran, heavy sanctions to counter the nuclear program. Second of all, Trump keeps talking about Israel needs to end the war. Israel needs to end the war. I can tell you that the way the prime minister's office is interpreting that is, I'm going to help Israel end this war quickly. That ending the war means winning the war. So those are like the really big things that he's sort of looking at and hoping will happen. And at the same time, they're worried about what's going to happen in the next few months while Biden is a lame duck.
And that's a reference to what Obama did back in 2016 with UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which was very harsh, to say the least, about Israeli settlements.
Correct. There's also, you talked about a possibly imminent attack from Iran, and they're worried about what exactly Biden will do about that. America has helped defend Israel every time. So the 2 times this year that Iran has attacked us. So I don't think that they doubt that America will do that again, but maybe there's more, maybe there are certain targets that Israel would want to strike, and so they're worried about Biden not wanting to do that. I've heard some optimistic voices, not necessarily in the prime minister's office, but people who know things, have optimistic voices that thought maybe Biden will be less shackled now by the sort of left-wing Democratic base and trying not to be like too pro-Israel to scare the voters in Dearborn, Michigan. So maybe, hopefully.
Shmuel, the Trump, though, that Netanyahu is going to work with is going to be slightly different. And it could be that Netanyahu might actually want to give him as a gift an end to the wars prior to his inauguration, clean the slate, start off, fresh, not have to get things from the president and be needy Israel right away. How do you see that?
Well, first of all, you're right. It's and we should keep this in mind. We still remember the 2016 Donald Trump, and we must account to the fact that we are in a new Middle East. It's not the same region that it used to be 8 years ago. And it's not the same president. He has the same name, but we can no longer talk about a Republican Party that is fractured between 2 camps, the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump camps within the party. Trump is the party. He controls all the institutions of the party. He controls the Senate and possibly the House. And most of the governors in the United States are Republican, and the Supreme Court is a conservative. So Trump of 2024 is a man much more in control than what it used to be. And I assume that he's going to try and implement his agenda to the full extent, because these are probably his last 4 years in office. Now, when it comes to Israel, look, to end the war could mean two possible things. One is to put pressure on Israel to end the war. The other one is to put pressure on Israel's enemies to end the war. I think what the prime minister is hoping for is that the mere presence of Trump as the president-elect is going to put pressure on Israel's enemies to wrap it up now. Because what President Biden can do now is go to Hamas and go to Hezbollah and tell them, look, you have two choices here. Either you end the war now when I'm still president and you might get a slightly better deal. You can wait for Trump. And Trump could decide to just let Israel do whatever it wants, inconsiderate of the human rights organizations and the opinion of the European Union and all other things that matter to us Democrats. It's a huge risk for Israel's enemies to wait for Trump. And I think that's why we might have a narrow window of opportunity, both for Israel to say, look, we are willing to make the deal now if you come forward and accept our reasonable terms. And for the enemies, again, waiting for Trump could mean a lot of trouble. Maybe this is what Trump means by ending the war. So just put his foot down and say, look, if you're not ending this now, you'll have to suffer the consequences when I'm president.
Lahav, but do you think that beyond obviously Israel and the war that we have, there's the Ukraine-Russia war and J.D. Vance's comments, cutting off the funding, stopping to fund the Ukrainian war effort. I mean, the world is going to change. So Israel does, to some extent, are we an exception to the new Trump rule, or do we actually have to fall in line to the new Trump rule?
So this is, I think, one of the sort of concerning things. Shmuel was talking about Republican control of both houses and the White House. But it's sort of like, what does Republican mean right now? Because there are sort of camps in the party that are more isolationist and less so. And J.D. Vance is definitely in the isolationist camp. And when you hear J.D. Vance speak about Israel, most of the things he says, he's very pro-Israel. He thinks the U.S. should support Israel. They're a great ally, etc. But then he gave a recent interview where he said, the U.S. and Israel, our interests don't fully overlap, and we're not going to go to war in Iran for Israel, which I don't think anyone was asking America to go to war in Iran, maybe for half a strike or two, which is something that Trump has done before and isolated, the strike on Soleimani. But I've always thought that there's a little bit of a logical problem, right? When you hear the way J.D. Vance talks about the world and giving aid to other countries, and then he just makes this exception about Israel, it just doesn't fit logically. And so I wonder how long that will last, and if it depends on very specific political circumstances. So I do think that's a concern. That being said, Trump doesn't speak exactly like these isolationists. It's true that he's not a traditional Republican in that way, but he, talks about sort of the Reagan peace through strength. He's not like Reagan in many other ways, but he likes peace through strength. He does talk about important allies of America, but it's true that they sort of need to be more in line with his vision.
Let me point you on this question to one item in the exit polls. They asked two questions in the exit polls. Do you think that the U.S. is too supportive of Ukraine? Those who said yes voted for Trump. Do you think the U.S. is too supportive of Israel? Those who said yes voted for Kamala Harris. So yes, Is Israel an exception? At least when it comes to these two issues, you could see the exact opposite answers within the exit polls from both Harris and Trump voters. Harris voters would support the Ukraine, but less so Israel. Trump supporters would be more supportive of Israel, but less so of the Ukraine.
So on that point, Shmuel, something interesting happened on Tuesday. We had the political comeback, obviously, of, one of the greatest of all time, of Donald Trump. And we also had something, a bit of a political comeback of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with the firing and dismissal of Yoav Gallant, right? So Bibi, to an extent, is consolidating power within his own government as power is being consolidated in the United States. What does that mean for the relationship potentially between Israel and the U.S. and where is Bibi going with all this? Is it just politics, just to get the Haredi draft bill passed, or whatever law, the kindergarten law, whatever is the law that they want to pass, or does this also have greater significance that should interest the American public?
Well, I think you're right. Netanyahu is consolidating his power. Whether that's only politics, if you ask Netanyahu, he'll tell you that to save Israel secure and safe, he must have the reins in his hands, because all other people are incapable. So for him, him being in office is an existential need for Israel. When I look at it, it seems like politics. And what we are going to get with the Trump victory is probably an even more confident Netanyahu. He's going to think, well, now with Trump in power, I can really implement my plans. I can really move forward pursuing my policies. And hence, it is even more important that I'll remain in office. And hence, I can I'll use whatever trick that's necessary to keep my coalition intact and stay in power for as long as needed.
So, Lahav, on that point, the Israeli government, which talks about now, and I've seen some settler leaders even referring to, wow, there's an opportunity now for annexation. We should annex the West Bank. And I love how, just personally, it's always been like this. Maybe it's my pet peeve, but like, if Netanyahu wanted to annex the West Bank, he could have done it a million times over. Right? It's just passing a law in the Knesset. He's had the majority. So I mean, like, all these things of, now we have an American president. So I mean, like, you guys want to make a decision, make a decision. Stop depending what Israel's going to do based on, who the president is around the world. But whatever. I mean, how do you see the Trump election impacting the local Israeli politics?
Okay, so specifically on the issue of annexation, like I think you're right. I mean, even in 2020, when we thought that Israel might extend its sovereignty, it was like a gradual plan, what they had come up with. It was going to be like Ariel, it wasn't going to be everything. And I think that these people are overly optimistic about Trump. I mean, frankly, like, his plan included a two-state solution. They don't want a two-state solution. And it was the Trump administration that put the brakes on Netanyahu to annex even a small part of Judea and Samaria.
Right.
So I don't think they're being realistic. I still think they have reason to celebrate from the perspective of the Yesha Council, which is the governing council of Judea and Samaria communities. Because I think Trump's not going to give them a hard time about construction. And in the Biden administration, it was like, everything, the expression they always like to use is like, if we want to close off our balcony to make an extra room, like, Washington is up in arms. So, I think that's going to end. And for that movement, right, every additional home is a victory. So I still think they have reason to celebrate, but they're really their expectations are too high from their perspective.
And before I let you go, Lahav, just one last question. There's a lot of talk of who are going to be the officials, right? Who are going to, let's say, have anything to do with the Israel portfolio or the Middle East.
Yeah.
David Friedman, Aryeh Lightstone, Brian Hook, who should we expect to see? What are you hearing of who might be coming back? Who might be new names? Who might be
Well,
here?
first of all, I think that people should be reading Jewish Insider because that's where my colleagues in Washington really excel at these kinds of stories. But I'm hearing a lot of names. One name that, frankly, I was not familiar with until a few months ago is Peter Deutsch, who's a former congressman, former Democratic congressman who retired and made Aliyah and is now a Republican and campaigned for Trump this year. I'm hearing that he might be getting something. So that might be a name that we're hearing soon, to Peter Deutsch. I know David Friedman, the former ambassador, would like to make a comeback, not necessarily as an ambassador again to Israel, but maybe be involved in a different way and as some sort of special envoy or something. In terms of Secretary of State, there are a lot of different senators who want it. Some of the names I've heard are Rubio, Tom Cotton, although Cotton, I think, also wants Department of Defense. But these are big friends of Israel, in the Senate. So for them to be in key positions, I think would be good for Israel.
Let's just say it will be very interesting, whatever happens next.
Definitely.
So Shmuel, Lahav, thank you so much for joining us, and to all our viewers and listeners, have a good Shabbat. You can find us always on Spotify, podcasts on Apple, and of course on YouTube and the Times of Israel's website. In the meantime, celebrate